Welcome to the Parts Party. I'm Adriana.
And I'm Ella.
And this is your invitation to hang out with us and our beautiful guests as we explore the lived experience of internal family systems. We want to share in our common humanity as humans who have multiple parts within us, so we can show you what it really is to honour this model of therapy in our own lives. This is a place for IFS nerds, therapists, enthusiasts, or just anyone who wants to get to know their parts and their self a little better.
So grab a soft drink for your little ones, a tea for your manager parts, and maybe something fancy for your firefighter parts. Because all parts are welcome. Our guest today is Dr. Laura Patryas. She is a spiritual teacher and IFS therapist, as well as a researcher and author with a PhD in psychophysics. She first encountered IFS 10 years ago by accident when she mistakenly signed up for what she thought was a Family Constellations workshop. Instead, it turned out to be an IFS Constellations workshop, which helped her powerfully connect with her grieving and anxious parts. That's a hilarious, great, happy mistake, Laura. That's so funny. So before we ask you to introduce yourself, we both just wanted to share how remarkable your book was and what an absolute phenomenal piece of work and gift to the world. Myself, my teacher is Muji, so Advaita Vedanta types of teaching. So it was so affirming and answered a few big questions that I hadn't quite clicked in yet. So just thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that. I loved writing it. I didn't know I was going to write a book. It kind of wrote itself. It wanted to be written. It's just this moment where I woke up one morning at 5 a.m. and this kind of thought crept into my consciousness and it said, write that book now. I was like, which book? Which book do you want me to write now? Okay. And for a year, I was kind of gripped by this muse. And so every morning I'd wake up at 5 and I'd get down and I'd write this book. Then I'd drop my daughter off at school and then I'd come back and type some more. And then evening time, I'd sit down and type some more. And then a year later, it was so odd because I'd opened up the Word doc file where I'd first wrote the first few words, and it was nearly a year to the day when I'd opened this file up, fresh.
Wow.
It was like, wow, I seem to have written a book. Well, that's nice. So it kind of happened. It was obviously ready to pour out. So I'm glad that people like yourselves and others have, found it really useful bridge in between the transcendent and the immanent and, IFS and kind of deeper self, as Dick in No Bad Parts calls it, self with capital letters, self. When Sid and I first felt it was time to make this kind of non-dual IFS group, people were a bit like, oh, wow, yeah, we've been feeling this. This has been coming for a while. And of course, Locke Kelly had done so much work prior to it, so it wasn't new. But then people were like, well, how does parts work fit into it? We're saying non-duality, and yet there's this multiplicity. How does that work? And actually, talking about no bad parts, there's a really fantastic quote in No Bad Parts that I think I've almost now learned it off by heart. Is it fine if I read it out? Because it's so good.
Of course.
Oh, great. So Dick says this. He says, I believe that flow states are an example of when all your parts are fully aligned with the purpose or pleasure of the activity of themselves meld with yours. In a sense, they temporarily dissolve and you are in the non-dual wave state, even though you are still operating in this world. So doesn't that just speak of this both and? This kind of non-dual, no self or no soul, yet still operating in this world. I mean, how can that be? So that's what the book is kind of trying to clarify or discern and go deeper into the embodied and the felt sense of this no self that's also in this world. How can that be? What a beautiful koan. Yeah, we're all just a bunch of walking koans.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. And I'm so glad that I'm not going to say I'm so glad you wrote this book. I'm going to say I'm so glad this book happened for you, as you said. When I came across your work, I got so excited. I think I just linked to Ella. I was like, non-dual IFS, we have to get her on. I really want to talk about this book. And I've got it here. And I know where this is audio only, but you can see how many sticky notes. Oh, it's so rich. There's so much depth. And it's so comprehensive. You've really so beautifully woven in just all facets that non-duality and duality encompasses. And that's the thing I really love about it as well. It's, as you said, it's the both and. It doesn't exclude duality. It kind of transcends and includes it. And it's just, it's such a gift. And I have to speak for my part that is really excited and a little bit nervous to speak to you because it really inspires me and touches me. Yeah, so that one is maybe now chattering a little bit because she's very excited.
I'm enjoying her. Thank you so much for naming her. Yeah, so do you want to hear kind of a little more about how I came across this IFS or how it found me? So it seems to be a journey of being found rather than trying to find anything. So yeah, like you mentioned earlier, about 10 years ago, so not too long after my daughter was born, and boy, wasn't that just a portal into something else, you know? Babies are like little Buddhas. They come into our lives and they completely turn everything upside down. And, you know, before my daughter was born, I'd already done like 20 years of mindfulness and meditation. I was working deeply with my teacher. I was so laid back, you know, nothing could touch me. And then this little baby comes into my life. So yeah, so soon after that, I figured out, oh, there is stuff here for me to really look at. Let me work with these wounds. And so I honestly thought I was going on a family constellation workshop. I was like, great, I get to work with my mother and father wounds, and someone will play my father and someone will play my mother, and everything will be great. And I turn up there, and it's actually a fantastic UK-based therapist, Ruth Culver, that was reading it. And she's just fab. So I turn up there, you know, naive and innocent. I don't really know what I'm doing. And she says, oh no, it's internal family. And she's like parts. And I said, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? Like my internal father and my internal mother? Because I was still like, there was a part that was very much, it's the kind of the self-like parts that really wants me to heal, right? It's like, go on this workshop, read this book. Yeah, we've all done it, right? And it's a beautiful part because it's the part that got me reading Rumi. It's the part that got me into meditation. And so it's a really beautiful part. But what I was like, what do you mean, my inner mom and my inner dad? And boy, it was so powerful. So I got to externalize. So I don't know if you've ever done this kind of work.
Yeah, we did it at our level one. Yeah.
Ah, that's so cool. I think it's called sculpting now. That's like the new hippie word, like the new kids.
Yeah.
I had someone play what my part had known of who my father was. Someone played my anxious part. Someone played my grief. And it was just, oh my word. And I never felt so embodied, you know, even after 20 years of mindfulness and meditation practice, when someone in the audience took my part, I felt so grounded and present. It was as though the part was actually gone. And it was like, away, away. I thought I was healed, but actually, my body is still so hypervigilant. And that was when I started to figure out that you can be intellectually healed. There can be that awakening that can be very much in the mind, but the body still, to quote Bessel van der Kolk, keeps the score. Yeah. And I was still kind of acting out through my body. But when someone took that part, I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. So I worked in a very deep way with this part live, and I was watching it being acted out through someone else. And then when it was time for it all to end, I was like, actually, you keep that part. I was like, okay, I don't want that part. It's okay. You keep the anxious and the grief part. And it was amazing because it was like magic. The moment the session had come to an end and Ruth said, okay, now D roll, the part immediately jumped into my body and the hypervigilance went up. And I was like, wow, that's so amazing. How can this be? And so I think from that moment on, I figured out your child was born into this world on some level to show you that you need to still work with your body. Yeah. Because I really honestly, oh, bless this self-like part, she was completely sold on the fact that I was healed. I was enlightened. There was no more shadow here. I'm done. I'm the finished product. And it was like the universe was swinging her arm and she was about to make contact with my chin, boof. And she's like, there you go. I'm serving you a really big one. And it was. But it was my first entry route. And of course, as for all of us, it just resonates IFS on such a deep level. It's like it made sense. You know, Dick often talks about the tuning fork effect. It's like the moment Dick came up with this model, it's as though he's like struck this giant tuning fork and the tone of it is still ringing out. And like those of us who really want to work with it, we can hear it. It's like that faint song melody. And we're like, oh, I know this. I know this. This is that embodied healing that I've been wanting. So the tune caught me and I fell in love with it. And, 10 years on, I'm looking forward to my IFS level 3 next month.
Beautiful.
How exciting.
Yeah, so that was my introduction to it.
Amazing. Oh, it's so beautiful. And what a gorgeous metaphor, the tuning fork just ringing out, and you can just hear that subtle sound. That's so true. And yeah, one of the notes I wrote down in prep for this, I wanted to comment on was how you emphasize the difference between intellectual understanding versus somatic embodiment and really letting like the cells of your body learning it rather than just those self-like parts that go, I've learned it now, I'm healed. There's a line I wrote down that you said, wisdom contained solely in the mind remains incomplete. And I just thought that was really beautiful. Last year I had my own journey where I just had months of these downloads coming to me that were kind of cosmic, showing me duality, non-duality, separation, just understanding it at these levels that were profound to me at the time. And I ended up with this whole chart that I'm still wrapping my head around as to what to do with it. But I definitely had parts that kind of grabbed onto that and went, oh, I understand this now. Job done. Healing done. I understand how everything works now. Great. And it took me a while to realize, oh, my body needs to integrate all of this. And that's going to be an ongoing journey that I've really only begun. The intellectual understanding that was such a gift that I was given because it was profound, but that's just the beginning. It's quite humbling.
Yeah. And it makes me think of that really great Ram Dass quote where he says, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family.
That'll do it.
Right. No one like your mum or your dad or your child can really bring you back to that grounded body, and the heart's going and you're acting out like a 3-year-old child. And it,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
of course, talking about that tuning fork, self has a kind of tuning fork effect. It has a resonance, but so do parts. Parts can pull us into their resonance too.
Mm.
So it's like we're yo-yo in between self's resonance, and then we kind of get drawn into parts resonance, right?
Mm.
They both have their own energy.
Yeah, that's so true. I'm really curious. So, after this experience of the sculpting or constellation workshop that you went to, if that was your introduction to parts and it was kind of this externalization of parts, and you said, oh, once it was over, it was this sense of, oh no, stay over there, I don't want you back. How did you start to engage with parts and come to experience yourself internally as a system of parts?
Yes. So I went ahead, and pretty much the following day, I booked my first IFS therapy session.
Mm.
And it was with a fantastic local therapist. And we started to really work with the two main parts that I brought into that session, which was the anxious part and the grieving part. And I had that for sort of 3 years or so. And then the journey deepened. So before my daughter was born, I hadn't spoke Polish, which is my mother tongue, really, not very much, which is a kind of a sign, isn't it? It's like, well, Laura, why have you not kept your Polish up? And then when my daughter was born, I had a very diligent manager part that says, oh, it'll be really good if she was brought up with a dual language. So I spoke Polish to her. And then at some point when she was 2 or 3, I figured out I need to do IFS in Polish now. This needs to go deeper, because what I figured out is that my pre-verbal parts, or even my kind of early verbal parts, spoke Polish. They only spoke Polish.
Wow.
So when this English lady is talking at me, get in touch with this and that part, my Polish parts go, ma, I don't know what you're saying.
Wow.
So my journey then, so I had English IFS for about 3 years, and then went on to Polish for about a year and a half. And that was so deep. That was so deep. And yeah, there's gratitude surfacing for me, because that was the first time I heard a soft Polish voice, that resonance of self. Yeah. Previous to that, my young parts had only heard, shouting and, that kind of that aggressive way. And that was the first time that my parts were like, oh, there is softness, or there could have been. So that was a very, very deep journey. Of course, I thought, right, it's time for me. As I was doing the IFS therapy in Polish, I trained in IFS level 1. And that was another beautiful journey. It's like every time we go over these burdens, these wounds, they get less and less. Yeah. They kind of get integrated more and more and more. It's a bit like, if there's any ridges on the sand, and then the waves come over it, they go back, and there's less and less, and they come over it the second time, and the water, or the essence of water, or the essence of self, smooths out the ridges and the rough bits. Every time. So every time we come to these parts with our self-leadership, or with someone else's self, we've got that tuning fork effect going. And these wounds get to smooth out. A few years ago, I had this strong image that came to me. And I had this image of my most exiled place. The ones I don't know if you've worked with the IFS parts cards. There's one card where there's these exile parts, kind of these very lean figures kind of walking around in this cave, very, very shadowy place. And that was my most exiled place. And, it's you could call that the dark night of the soul, where you're really in the heat of it all. And I had this image of this kind of the wound that was left from those exile parts, which weren't my own. I also have a lot of legacy burdens, right? We go deep. IFS is not for the faint of heart. But I had this image of this thick scar tissue all around the kind of the innermost crevices of the cellar, the exiled place. And I kid you not, I loved it. It's as though I was walking around with self's light and walking around through these kind of exiled places. And there was this scar tissue, something that previously would have felt quite horrible for me to look at. Mm-hmm. It was almost like all these burns victims, but I looked at them and I just saw their softness, their beauty. And I had this feeling of wanting to snuggle up against this beauty because this scar tissue felt so beautiful to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was just so deep, so deep. And then, of course, as you both know, the journey's layered, yes? Mm. You keep going round and round over the same content, seeing it from different angles. And then, of course, came psychedelics. Those old friends, yes? I was brought up in the Catholic Church in communist Poland, so I never did the whole drugs thing. It kind of bypassed me. And when I moved to Britain, I was a good child, you know. But then probably mid-30s, we were in Wales and we were walking through these fields in October, beautiful trees, the landscape's gorgeous, gorgeous hills. And Wales is such a beautiful place for healing too. And from afar back, me and my friend, we saw these people kind of now and then bending down and picking something. And we thought, what are they doing? And we walked up closer and we're such a sweet pair of lambs, so innocent. We just walked up there. And we said, what are you doing? And he says, we're picking liberty caps. And I was like, oh, well, that's a curious thing. And then, of course, that opened up that realm for me, So I thought the deep IFS journey, which is very trance-like, which is very psychedelic, yes. I thought that was very deep. Doing it in Polish was very deep. Really exploring my innermost caves was very, very deep through a kind of Jungian lens. And then the psychedelics took me even deeper. It's like, wow, does this end? So much so that you come out the other side and you go, oh, wait, I'm back again. It's like that's
the hero's journey.
Right, that kind of keeps eating itself and it keeps going round and it's like eating its own tail. And it's like, oh, wait, there actually truly is no beginning and no end. Mm-hmm. So that's in a very very long-winded way, my IFS journey.
These things keep finding you and taking you somewhere, don't they, Laura? Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm hearing that you're very visual. You talked about seeing those little ones in the cave. As you go about day to day, as parts arise in you, do you see them, hear them, feel them? We always love hearing about how people experience their parts.
So I feel for me, it's a mixture of all three, really. I don't see color. So when my eyes are closed, it's weird because I see color, but I don't. It's like I see them in my mind's eye as opposed to as though I was watching a movie or. So for me, my parts mainly arise as movements in the body, like kind of energetic shifts. So I can feel like a kind of my heart close. I tend to feel them in my upper body and in my head. So if I notice a manager part that's running late, then I tend to notice my shoulders will contract, my heart will as well. And I'll just notice, I'll go, oh, there is a manager part. And occasionally my daughter will point out my parts.
Wow.
So she'll, I don't know if you recall this page in IFS Level 1 manual, but it says, what it is to be a self-led therapist. What does that mean? And one of the bullet points is to allow your client to point out your parts.
Mm.
Allow them to say, hey, is there a little part here? Now, because my daughter was brought up with IFS, because in a way she was the portal for this journey, really, or the catalyst. And she will point out my parts. She'll say, Mummy, is your self-like part here? And then I get an opportunity. So she is this kind of, she's a mirror, she's a guide, she's a teacher, as am I. So we're just both here on this human journey. And she gives me that opportunity to say, hey, let me just check, thank you. Yeah, I think there is a self-like manager part here, and this part feels a bit rushed. Often when we're dashing out the door, when we're running late, you know, and thank you for pointing it out because now I have the opportunity and I will work with her parts when we, Inside Out, isn't it just the best film for introducing kids and clients and, anyone to the world of IFS? So Inside Out 1 was amazing. But when we watched Inside Out 2, the anxious part, oh my God. So me and my daughter were watching it and we were like, oh, this is the anxious part. She was like, Mommy, this is the anxious part. I'm like, yeah, this is the anxious part. And we both had so much compassion for the anxious part. So when we do this beautiful ritual at night time where if her anxious part comes on board, we'll see it, we'll name it. Dan Siegel does this beautiful name it to tame it, which we really love. But I'll say, great. Now that we've got it, would it like to come into my heart? And she says, yes. And so, because I don't think kids have got big enough, self can't quite fully operate in a child's body yet.
Yeah.
So I need to be the self for her. And so I say, would you like Mummy to take this part in my heart? And she says, yes. And she'll kind of place this part in the palm of my hand, and then I'll put it in my heart, and I'll say, oh, that's better. And then I'll say, can you feel it? Can you feel how there's a bit more spaciousness in your body now? And again, we're back to that resonance. We're back to that tuning fork. She'll say, yeah, Mummy, that feels so much better. So it's like the anxious part gets to be kept safely, tucked away for the night in my heart, where my larger body mind and my beautiful prefrontal cortex can deal with it. Yeah. So it's, yeah. So these parts show up in various ways within and without. Sometimes, as therapists, both of you will know, a client will come in with exactly the part you're having trouble with in yourself.
Yeah.
And you're like, how can this be? And you're sitting there, straight face as much as you can. You're like, I'm not going to let on.
Laura, I just wanted to speak to, I just felt like my little ones like come close to the computer and just kind of feel that beautiful parenting and have a little drop of tear. Like I've got tears in my eyes. It's just so beautiful to hear. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I was feeling the same. And then also thinking you're just making me fall in love with IFS all over again. And I'm already very much in love with it. So it's a gift. But it's an interesting thing you've brought up because there's this little excerpt from your book that I would love to read if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
That kind of relates to what you were just saying. It's about 1.5 paragraphs. I hope you're okay with me reading this. At the ultimate level of pure awareness, there are no methods or techniques, as there is no work to be done. Yet, from the perspective of individual parts, there is an experience of suffering that prompts clients to seek therapy. The non-dual approach does not view suffering as something that should be avoided. Instead of treating problems as issues to solve, we embrace them as part of the human experience, an invitation to rediscover our wholeness. Therapists are not fixers, but fellow explorers, journeying alongside clients to uncover experiential truths and move towards wholeness. There is no need to eliminate thoughts, emotions, or aspects of our inner world to find freedom. Instead, we welcome whatever arises, feelings, beliefs, stories, bodily sensations, energy, even suffering itself, as a gateway to an unconditioned state of being. Adyashanti agrees that this approach is deeply respectful. If I know that you, no matter how you are sitting in front of me, are the manifestation of God, how am I going to be with you? Now, maybe God is pretending over there in your part to be very confused and suffering, but if I really know that that's God, but just maybe confused, now how am I going to be with you? Not only in my words, but also in my energy, how am I going to approach you now? You see, it becomes holy, something very sacred. It doesn't mean I just skip by your suffering and tell you you're God and bypass and discount everything. But on the level of the heart, it's a wholly different encounter. And the sentiment isn't exactly new. As you said, you're reflecting back truths that we already know. And I know that that's how I view being a therapist. But something happened when I was reading those pages the first time around where I actually just had to stop. I paused and I just sat in silence and I felt this peace. And I realized it wasn't just that it was speaking to me, the one who already knows that truth. It was speaking to my therapist parts that want to control and fix and have agendas, or as you said, go, oh my God, they're bringing in the exact issue that I am struggling with in my life. Um, it was almost like they went, oh, and they just felt that peace. And I've noticed since then the subtlest difference in how I feel during therapy sessions. And sometimes I notice even that phrase almost just gets quietly whispered to these parts in the session. It goes, this client is a manifestation of God sitting in front of me. And those parts just sit in reverence and they're just in reverence of the client and the process. And they just let it unfold rather than feeling like they have to think so much or do anything in particular. So, yeah, I'm just really grateful.
I love how you said that. This is God sitting in front of me. It's just perfect. And of course, we could talk on this for hours, and I'm looking at the clock now, but we need to unburden the word God, right? Because when we say God, we mean that capital self that Dick talks about in No Bad Parts. We're talking about being, presence, sacredness, that which never ever changes. I've always abided by this phrase that I go by when I sit with a client. It's there is nothing you can do or say that will change my mind about your inherent sacredness, holiness, lovability, worth.
Yeah.
And that almost allows clients to tell me, or for these parts to let another human hear about this thing that they've been so deeply ashamed of their entire life. You know, we're talking about the parts that are burdened with, racist parts or even deeper parts. And as I've never said this to anyone else, Laura, I don't know why I'm saying it to you. And it's like, well, because I already see you as God, as that which is.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can tell me that will change my mind about that. So I love that you've brought that in. Gratitude. Gratitude.
We're all in the tuning fork right now.
Oh.
When all of that stuff was happening for me last year and these insights were coming in, what I now call it and what it was shown to me as is isness. And even when you said God, that which is, and within that is contained the reverence, the unconditional acceptance, the knowing that it's sacred, it's holy. And yeah, it's beautiful. But there's something about, I don't know why, but just that phrase, this client is a manifestation of God sitting in front of me. Something about that just drops for those parts every single time. So yeah.
Yeah, because parts can so easily, kind of start to get in, and we parts help us. Well, I wouldn't be here if I didn't have parts.
Yeah.
The fact that I'm a human in this human form right now means that there's a beautiful marriage of self and parts playing out. Yeah. And each of us is that all the time. So, often we talk about this phrase, are you in self? It's like, well, what do you mean am I in self? I cannot not be in self, first of all. But if by in self you also mean that have you gotten rid of your parts yet, that's also not true. Like, because my parts help me to manifest this human form, and parts are ultimately self.
Yeah.
So, sometimes we can weaponize self a little bit. We kind of make self holier than what it is. It's already all perfect at one level, yes? So it's a curious phrase, are you in self?
Yeah, I think the IFS as a whole has tried to get away from that more and more with talking about self energy and having enough of that on board, not being too blended, because then it becomes like, oh, my good enough. The parts can get very active around that, can't they? I've got to try and be in self.
Yes, and it's the trying, isn't it? It activates this trier, this kind of seeker part that says, right, where's self? Oh, I've got to find this self. Where is it? And then you find yourself, you're chasing your own tail. And then the self just watches on and goes, well, this just looks like a bit of playfulness here. Self's got plenty of playfulness. Self will not impose itself and say, hey, I'm here, start shouting and saying, how dare you not see me? I'm the almighty self.
Yeah, it was a great quote in your book about trying to, smoke out the ego. But it could be similarly said, like trying to be in self is like banging a drum and trying to find a robber or a thief.
Yes. And the ego, isn't it just a thing of beauty? I just have nothing, but ego is like what we're saying. Ego is nothing but God sitting in front of us, or let's say within us. That's all. But it's playing hide and seek. Ego likes to get lost. Like it goes off on its own. It's like the child, isn't it? It goes off and says, right, let me go and find this self, and then okay, I'll just be waiting here when you come back.
You've written this whole incredible book about this, but as people listen to these words, our beautiful parts, our ego, our self energy, would you give like a little mini version of what you see kind of as what is ego compared to parts? What is self?
Yeah, so I think this is a really great question. I think so. The ego would be the kind of the cluster of probably manager parts, perhaps if I don't know, cluster of manager parts that are attempting to keep some kind of order in the internal world. And so it's doing a beautiful service for us. Yeah. And it's kind of an interface in between the internal world and the external world. It tries to be an interface in between the unconscious and the conscious realm. But of course, the ego gets frightened of the unconscious realm because there's a lot of shadow in there. I just need to add 90% of the shadow is pure gold. So when I say the word shadow, I mean gold. I can do one better than that. 100% of the shadow is pure gold. Yes?
Yeah.
If we really mean that phrase, this is God sitting in front of me. Yeah. But so the ego gets very overwhelmed by ego, or this cluster of manager parts gets very overwhelmed in trying to navigate the internal world. And in so doing, it forgets that there's self. It forgets in its innocence. Yeah. And so the awakening isn't the awakening of the self, is the awakening of the ego to the presence of the self. Self is awake. Self doesn't need doing anything with it. Yeah. So it's the ego that awakens. It just needs a little tap and it turns around and it goes, oh, there you are. Yes. And this is what Carl Jung said. He said, for the first half of our life is spent building up a healthy ego, what it means to be a separate body mind in this world. We go to college, we go to university, we get married, we buy a house, we have kids, if you follow that route. Then at some point, Jung says we have a midlife crisis. And that's when we figure out that the ego's way of doing hasn't really led us to happiness. Yeah, it sort of led us down this kind of overgrown path, and it's not a very clear path, it's lacking clarity. And so then we need to awaken, or the ego needs to awaken to the self, that the self is really the one who can really organize, orchestrate, integrate, navigate, harmonize, make sense, heal, bring close to, soothe. Yeah, it's that fountain of infinite unconditional love and presence where each and every part can come to and be fed. There's that, isn't that lovely Rumi quote? It says, we walk around with empty buckets looking for water, forgetting that there's a fountain within us all along. Yeah. So then that self, as you both know, this is where I really love Dick's ingenuity. It's just beautiful. Big mind. He presents self as both a wave and a particle. So the particle is the kind of more embodied, it's the facet of the self that interacts with parts, that interacts with the physical realm, that really needs wiring of the brain. It really needs a kind of a fully mature prefrontal cortex in order to fully manifest in this world. Now that's the particle self, and it has the 8 C's and the 5 P's and a million other infinite beautiful words that we can add to it. And then the wave is just as I read out that quote, it's that flow, it's that just beingness, that isness or suchness. It's just, it's an open realm. And so we have the particle and the wave. The particle's like the kind of the noun-like, and then the wave is more of a verb. So that's self. And then the self energy. God, IFS doesn't make it easy, does it? So self energy is, I suppose, the embodiment of self. It's kind of the felt sense of secure attachment, of that resonance, presence. And I think I wrote down, there's a definition of it that I wrote down in my book. And I think I say something like, it's the kind of the chi, the prana, or the kundalini-like energy that flows through the body. And it has that aliveness to it. It has really beautiful felt sense and openness. We can tell when there's self energy. And it's that facet that has resonance too. So self has energy or resonance, which can be felt on the inside and on the outside. And parts have their own kind of energy too. And they both have the ability to pull us into their orbit. I think that's has that covered it.
Incredible. Yeah. These things are so hard to talk about, but you just really bring it out in words so beautifully. It's such a gift. Thank you, Laura.
Great.
I'm really curious how your experience of self has changed. I know you said that, prior to discovering IFS, you were doing 10, 20 years of work in more Eastern traditions. And I'm wondering, once you started working with your parts and seeing yourself as a system of parts, how did your relationship with self shift? Did it feel different? Did you engage with it different?
It's a great question. It definitely brought it to the body. Now, that's not to say, I mean, I'd already done, yoga for 20 years, and I'd done 5 rhythms and ecstatic dance for 10 years. And that's actually where I really had beautiful moments with seeing my heart open and this beautiful light coming out of the center of my chest. And this is even pre any psychedelics. I'd already had a really beautiful time seeing self in this embodied presence. I suppose what IFS really, yes, this is it. Now it's coming. Now this part's telling me, it's saying it just made sense. It organized things. It put structure and framework to what I'd already been working with. That's what this part's telling me. This is my scientist part. And I can just see this part. It's got a clipboard and a white little coat on, and it's saying, yes, it's brought structure, order, and framework. Because this is what IFS is great. And I actually think, in No Bad Parts, Dick says that in IFS, we experience what in the Eastern traditions we talk about, meeting the self or waking up to the self. IFS really helps us do this in a much more kind of step-by-step way. Here's how to. And so it really organized, it really clarified what's really going on. And my site, yeah, I'm really getting a sense of my scientist part is now rubbing his hand, it's a male, and it's going, yes, it really helped us to experiment more.
Mm.
So I think, yeah, it gave me some more words with which to work with. Yes. And certainly when I went on that first workshop where I got to externalize my parts, that was the first time that I really, because previously everything was inward. Yeah, everything was about I meditate, kirtan, yoga, all of those beautiful practices. But I hadn't really clocked that this work could be done with others, or that it could be that others could hold my part and nurture my parts and give them back, and that beautiful embodied presence, and this is why direct access in IFS is really vital. Yeah, so vital, because the therapist can give you that sense of self that maybe our parents could have done. Yeah. Because as a child, we experience self in projection. So we mainly feel it from the parents. But if we don't, it's really beautiful to have it mirrored in the therapist. So I think that's what IFS is really good at. It's saying you do have self, and if you don't have access to it yet, I will be that self for you, and you can borrow it. You can come and feed at my fountain here. I will lend you my body brain. Yeah, I will co-regulate with you, and I'll be here until such day where you will look into your own face and there will be self looking back at you. Yeah. So I think that's what IFS is really good at, making the process much more user-friendly and really much easier to interact with. Yeah, it's magic. I'm so thankful, grateful to Dick, and everyone in the IFS family who's really, come into and made this model what it is now. And the model carries on, no?
It's alive. Yeah.
Right, that tuning fork is still ringing, picking up different energies. Oh, come in and let's work on this branch of the model. Let's expand here. And it's like a flowering tree, the canopy is the ever-growing tree of this beautiful model of ours. So gratitude, total gratitude.
Yeah. So I have a greedy part just saying, just keep her talking. This is absolute gold. I'm aware that we're coming towards the end of the time and we want to give you back to your daughter. And people can find you in other places. Do you want to share what your book is called or other things that you have where people can find you?
Yeah, sure. So the book is called Awaken to Love, and there's a longer title there, but if you Google that and you Google my name, something will come up. So I've got a website. I think it's drlaurapatryas.org, something like that. I don't even know what my website is.
We can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, one of the nicest places. Don't come to me, come to community. Come and be with us. So there's a really beautiful IFS group that myself and Sid help to nurture and facilitate. And that's really where so much gold is shared. Not just from me, but from everyone else. Everyone brings in their unique glimmers and glimpses of self. So there's poetry there. There is questions there. That's where to go. So it's the non-dual IFS community on Facebook. It's a beautiful group. It kind of just runs itself now.
That's how I found you.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful.
Nice.
Well, to finish, you were going to gift us a poem that you wrote, Laura.
Yes, so I actually wrote this after one of the really lovely psychedelic journeys. So this is a really beautiful poem, and it really highlights this both and this human, this kind of immanent and transcendent. So yeah, this being human is a living classroom, breathing, moving, shaking, each moment a lesson, each breath a whisper of wisdom. The body, a chalkboard etched with experience. The heart, a compass pointing to the unknown. Here, the ground beneath your feet is not solid but alive, shifting, teaching. The joy that bursts like sunlight through cracks in the ordinary. The grief that pools like rainwater in the corners of your soul. All are teachers in this trembling, sacred space. You stumble and the earth whispers, rise. You ache and the stars murmur, feel. You love and the winds roar, keep going. This is no ordinary classroom. There are no walls, no desks, no grades, only the raw, pulsing truth of your existence, inviting you to lean in, to listen deeply. Mistakes are not failures here, but bold strokes on the canvas of becoming. Pain is not punishment, but the cracking open of new doors. Be the student who marvels, who dares to ask questions of the wind, who lets the sun teach them warmth and the shadows teach them depth. This being human is a living classroom, breathing, moving, shaking. And every moment is a lesson in how to be fully awake in this body.
Thank you.
So beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So moving.
Thank you both so much for having me. I could talk to you both for hours and hours.
And thank you for being so gracious to our fangirl parts. We've really enjoyed it.
I think the fangirl part has only grown stronger.
Yeah.
Really appreciative of this time and this conversation. It was just so beautiful. I'm glowing.
Yeah, I am too. Resonance.
Mm.
Thank you both so, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being part of the Parts Party with Adriana and Ella. We hope you enjoyed being with us, and we wish you many moments of self-leadership. We'd love your support by liking and subscribing, and we hope to see you next time.